Good morning and welcome back to another episode of UFL Central. It's been a couple weeks since we've done an episode, but we're back to talk about all the things the United Football League. There was a couple great games so far this weekend. We got another one today that I think is going to be very competitive. We'll talk about all the games that have passed over the past 2 days. We'll preview the games for next week before our next show, given the show is Sunday. And there's 2 games next Sunday. We will be reviewing the game or previewing the games on Friday and Saturday, but we will not discuss the ones on Sunday, just so everybody's all clear how that works. But before we get into that, we're going to start you off with a little bit of metal. All right, and before we get into it, Michael, how are you doing this morning, man?
Man, I'm doing well. Just glad to be here and back on the show and having a little bit of free time to be able to talk a little bit of UFL. The season's been really good, and it looks like we're winding down here into crunch time, and some teams have been kind of uh, wavering down the stretch here. Not a good time to be doing it. But overall, I'm doing really well, man, and excited to be here.
Definitely, same here. Like I said in the lead up, it's been a couple weeks since we had a show. 2 weeks ago, it was primarily my fault. I overslept. Last week, obviously Mother's Day. Every single one of us that does this show is married and has wives that are mothers outside of Travis. So we all kind of had some obligations we had to take care of for that. So obviously we didn't have a show last week, but we hope all the mothers had a great day and they're all back and ready to watch some football this Sunday and focus on some UFL hopefully. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into it today. There's a ton to talk about, but the first big piece of news and first item that I had on our list today was that Orlando clinched a playoff spot with their win Friday night. So might as well start right there. Obviously, Orlando's been one of the teams that's been rolling pretty well through the season so far. Currently sits 6-2 after 8 weeks, and they have the top record in the league. So I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously Orlando's played really well all season. This game was a little bit tighter than maybe some of us might have expected. But, I mean, do you see any other team right now that could potentially unseat Orlando in terms of being that top team? I mean, I know they've got 2 losses, but it seems like they've been a lot more convincing than some of these other teams so far.
Well, I mean, I think that you have to obviously look in DC's direction, the stability of the coaching staff there. I know that Tiamo got hurt yesterday. I did not catch the back half of the game, so I do not know if he returned or not. But, um, I think DC is still a team that you have to consider as a contendership just based upon, obviously, the coaching stability. A lot of the players that did return are very familiar with the system. And if I remember correctly, last year when DC was on their way to the championship in winning the championship, they had a stretch right before the playoffs started where some games were a little bit of a struggle for them. This seems to be a pretty common thing for the defenders. So you can't really count them out. St. Louis is an interesting one because even though they're 5-3, uh, they're the one team that I feel like if they get hot could go, but at the same time they're one of those teams that can you really take them as a contender for some reason? They seem to struggle a little bit against some of the bottom feeder, quote unquote bottom feeder teams. So they play down to their competition, and I don't know if they're strong enough to be able to play up to their competition in the playoffs. But at the same time, Luis Perez is out there, so you can't really count them out per se because Luis Perez still finds a way to win in the spring. And moving forward, Ricky Prohl seems to have his guys playing solid enough. I know they lost this past weekend, but I would say DC is probably more of a threat than St. Louis is at this point. But it's hard to imagine that Anthony Becht is going to let Orlando slide. But at the same time, he never won a championship with St. Louis, so there's a good chance that it could be one of those things where Beck just for some reason doesn't show up in the playoffs. Who knows? We'll have to see how that goes. Maybe he gets over the hump with the Orlando team, but at this moment in time, I would say DC is probably more of a threat than St. Louis is.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point for sure. I mean, obviously, DC has the advantage of, like you said, they have their established staff that's been in place for multiple years at this point. They've got Jordan Teamu leading the way, or up until yesterday, hopefully his injury isn't too serious, but he did not return to the game last night. He did not return to the game. I believe it was Spencer Sanders that finished out the game for them at quarterback, and Teamu was seen in street clothes on the sideline for the rest of the game. So hopefully he can return the upcoming week, or at least for the playoffs, if nothing else, because obviously he's one of the funnest quarterbacks to watch in this league. And he's kind of like, in my mind, him and Luis Perez have always been like the poster children for spring football in my mind. Jordan Teamu played all the way back in his rookie year in the XFL in 2020. So he's kind of been a guy that's been around forever. So you hate to see the injury this late in the game for him, and like I said, hopefully he can come back healthy. But I do like DC's chances. I like what you said about St. Louis. St. Louis is kind of a little bit of a quagmire for me because, they're 5-2, 5-3 now, 5-3. And they've started multiple different quarterbacks. Just started Luis Perez for the first time.
If you take a look at 7-3, sorry,
you're good. So if starting Luis Perez for the first time, I think maybe contributed a little bit to their struggles yesterday, and maybe they'll solidify moving forward down the line, and end up going on a little bit of a run down here the stretch. But realistically, I just don't know that I'm as confident in St. Louis right now as I am in DC, much like you said. Do we still have you?
Or if it's yours, but I'm getting a little bit of a lag on somebody's end. So I apologize for all the viewers out there at this point in time. I don't know. It could be me for sure. I completely agree with you as far as St. Louis is concerned. Like, it's just not as confident. The team just isn't built the same for some reason. There's something going on overall where you look at this team and you don't view them as a legitimate threat the way that you did in the years past. And I'm not sure if that's because of the coaching changes or the quarterback issues, because I think you said in the chat the other day that this was Luis Perez was like the fourth different starting quarterback for St. Louis this year, and to be 5-3, it is impressive. It's a good coaching job by Ricky Prohl to get to that point of being 5-3. It's just a very odd dynamic for the team. It feels very inconsistent, even though they're 5-3. Where DC 5-3 feels a little more of a consistent team. The last 2 weeks defensively have not been good for DC. I will say that, but outside of these last 2 weeks, DC was one of the most stable. You knew what you were going to get from them. So I am curious about what Teamu's injury is going to look like for DC. Seeing how they played with Spencer Sanders yesterday, I don't think Spencer Sanders coming in is going to necessarily hurt the defenders at all. I think it's going to be a pretty seamless transition because they have very similar skill sets. Actually, all three quarterbacks, they could even start Jason Bean if they really wanted to. All three quarterbacks on DC have very similar skill sets. So I think it's kind of a plug and play at that quarterback position. I think that's more the system than necessarily it is the talent per se. And that's good news for DC because that's where DC can kind of overcome those injuries, whereas some other teams may not be able to. So I agree with you. I think St. Louis at this point in time is not as confident. Maybe it's the quarterback changes. Maybe it's the overall makeup of the team. Who knows? And again, they're also one of those teams that may get hot and get hot at the right time and move themselves into a championship that unfortunately Anthony Becht was not able to bring home to St. Louis.
I would agree. I mean, how good would the storylines be if it's Orlando and St. Louis somehow, some way, and in the championship game, and then it's Anthony Becht playing against his old team. I mean, that'd be crazy to see. But I think what you said about DC there makes a lot of sense, and honestly, I think in a lot of scenarios, you lose a guy like Jordan Teamu in the UFL, you're going to be somewhat concerned about that team. But at the same point, DC has the advantage of Spencer Sanders, who's been around in that system for a year or two already. So he knows what he's stepping into. It's not like it's not like they threw Jason Bean to the fire right away. A couple weeks after acquiring him, and he doesn't really know the offense and stuff like that. So I think in this particular case, DC is set up for success regardless of what's going on with Tiamo right now. And I think that's a credit to the staff who really kind of valued the returning players over like trying to rebuild their roster in the draft this season. So, like I said, shout out to that staff. I really like how they've built it, and credit to them, because now, like I said, I have a lot more faith in what they're able to do down the stretch, even with St. Louis bringing in a guy like Luis Perez. I still think DC's probably got to be that favorite for that 2 seed if they don't even, manage to leapfrog Orlando at some point. So I will say that coming into the show, one of the topics that I wanted to discuss, and we'll get to a little bit more later, was the parity in the league, because prior to this, we had Orlando had 6 wins. We had St. Louis and DC that both had 5 wins and both ended up losing this weekend. Then you had Louisville, Columbus, Birmingham, and I'm blanking the other team at the moment, but they all had 3 or less wins, or 2 or less wins going into yesterday, and now all of those teams have more than a handful of wins at this point. So that is something good that came out of this weekend. There's a lot more competition, a lot more like I said, parity in the league right now than I believe there was in years past, when Birmingham kind of just ran the table.
If Columbus beats Birmingham today, there'll be every single team will have 3 wins. So I think that's something that can't go unstated. And honestly, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I feel like that, Mike Rapoli, for everything that he did, online, and the fan base kind of questioning him and all that stuff. Like, I think that Rapoli brought an internal structure for the league from the top down. We talked a little bit about this before, but I think that the changes that he made at the league level is part of this contributing factor to what we're seeing in the UFL ratings and the competitive nature of the league. And I think I think it's important, because whenever I've worked anywhere in my entire life, any position job that you're at, if it's chaotic, it usually comes from the top down. So it's usually starting from the very baseline of the owners, if they're super active in the everyday business, which a lot of them were, obviously for whatever reason, and it trickles down. It's a weird dynamic when it comes to that. And in this particular situation, like, even though Rapoli is very passionate, he's very emotional, he's very outspoken, which is I think refreshing from a league owner that has kind of become the face of the league. He's done a really good job of bringing stability at the top part of the league, and we're starting to see the benefits of that. It's not a perfect system, obviously. There's still a lot of things to work out, but we have to remember that this league is still in its infancy across the board. I mean, it's only year 5 for all spring football for the most part, or year 6 overalls for the spring football, not including the spring league and the AAF. But this particular UFL league, I think, is only on its 4th year as a combination. So I do have to commend him for that, and I think you're seeing it with the parity. The allocation system, whatever it may be that they did with the initial startup, has worked out really well. And I think that that's only going to improve the overall stock of this league moving forward, especially as they continue to expand into 10 teams in 2 years, and all that. So I just want to make sure I mention that real quick, because I completely agree with you, and I think the parity is, I think the starts of this more competitive league definitely comes from the top of the ownership level with Rapoli. Even though he may be a loudmouth and people may not like him for being opinionated, but I think he's done a fantastic job of not only being transparent, like that's on us, and fixing things when fans, like the scoring thing that happened earlier this year. It was a rule that had been in place years ago, and if fans hated it, and he turned around and immediately they got it changed. So, commendable by all means on that front. And I think that that's not only helping the fans connect with this league, I think it's helping the players connect more with this league and not viewing it as more of just a paycheck. It's viewing it as like a legit, serious opportunity now. And they're going out and playing their hearts out, even if they're 2-4 or 2-5. So
100%, and I think it's awesome to see from a league perspective. Like, a couple weeks ago, we may have been a little bit critical of some of the trades that happened, but if you think about it, it was a redistribution of talent intentionally to create that parity, right? You send Luis Perez to St. Louis, you move Jason Bean over from Louisville, who, to their credit, has now found some success and found some wins since that move. And so it's an interesting situation how they all played it out. But at the same time, I think there's been some criticisms of Rapoli at the top as well because of his comments on veteran players. And I think maybe some of that stuff was blown out of proportion, right? Because I mean, if he was really super concerned about having guys that are like career UFL players, does a guy like Luis Perez even exist in this league? Probably not,
Or Tiamu.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe Tiamu has a little bit more of an excuse because he's younger, but either way, like both of those guys have been around for years, like we just talked about, since 2020 or for Perez 2019, I believe, in the AAF. So with that being the case, I mean, that's 7 years in Springs football at this point. So it is kind of crazy to kind of think about, all the things that he said overall, and to see him ultimately still end up with in my mind, a net positive from everything he's said and done over this off season. Because at one point, I'll be honest, I was not sold on a lot of things he was doing. Some of it made perfect sense to me, but some of it I had my questions about. And it so far, it seems like he's got the league trending in the right direction. So
yeah, I think that there's definitely. I mean, he's not without. He's not above. Criticism or whatever. Anyways, because he still has some things that they need to work out across the board. It's not a perfect league by any stretch of the imaginations. And I think Rapoli's comments about veteran players, and I'll be honest with you, I think Rapoli sees this league as and this is refreshing from a standpoint of it. Like, I think he sees this league as a sustainable way for football to exist in the spring without it necessarily becoming an NFL developmental league. I think that just right now at this point in time, because the money isn't coming in at the level of the NFL, it's harder to try to convince players, hey, stay in the UFL, make a name for yourself, right? So you lean into that. Like, yes, we're going to try to be a league to be that platform to catapult you into it. But if you really honestly have listened to not just the ESPN process, the Fox process of this league, it's been toned down about everything being about the NFL. Like, it's been toned down. Yes, there's still some things that are in there talking about moving up to the next level, but it's literally not every 35 seconds like it was last year or the year before. It has been kind of, retracted a little bit, like saying, okay, these guys are here. This is what makes them really good. We're surprised they're not in the NFL, but maybe this league can get them there. It's not, oh, they're trying to work their way back into the league, and you know what I mean? So it's like, yes, that may be the ultimate goal at this point in time still for the UFL, but I think that if you take a look at the TV ratings, which I shared in the chat, which I'd like to discuss a little bit as well, but if you take a look at the TV ratings as a whole, the TV ratings have really indicated that this is a league that can be sustained, and you can make a brand name for yourself here, which is why I don't think Rapoli, talking about the veteran players the way that he did, I don't think, like, Luis Perez is obviously a very clear, example. I don't think he meant it in the sense of like every veteran player. on the planet, or in spring football by any means. And I think it's also a testament to like the Hakeem Butlers of the world, and the defensive tackle for St. Louis that got hurt 2 weeks ago. That was he was 30 years old. Like, obviously has some veteran players that are in this league for good reason, and I think that's important, and I think Rapoli understands that. And I think honestly, Rapoli's ultimate goal is to break away from losing players to the NFL as a whole. If you want my honest opinion, I don't know when that will be. It's going to take a long time, but maybe that's just when he talks about the league and the way he talks about the league. I get the very big sense that he has a big picture in his mind, and maybe it's ambitious. I don't know. I mean, Mike Rapoli is definitely an ambitious individual, you could tell, and he's very passionate. So maybe that's his goal. I don't know if that's what he plans on doing, but everything that he brings energy-wise, it's the vibe that I get from him when he talks about this league. And from a TV viewership standpoint, it looks like it's heading in the right direction, especially when it comes to the next media rights package as well.
Agreed. I will say that, you're probably right on the comments that he made about the veteran players. And I know that it got kind of blown out of proportion, because a lot of guys were coming out and saying, oh, I'm getting blackballed or whatever it may be, which is kind of ironic, because after we covered that, at least one of those players was subsequently signed by St. Louis. Abdul Beecham was one of the guys that was complaining about the blackballing, and then he gets signed. So it was good to see that. And I think it was important from the league, whether they did it intentionally or not, because it kind of told us, like, hey, like, we're not blackballing anybody. It's not a personal thing. There's probably reasons why these guys aren't on teams right now. So in my mind, I think it was a good move by the league, whether, like I said, whether it was intentional or purpose or not. But at the same time, to your credit, I do think that he does have a big picture view, because he talks about it often, about the long-term view of it. 2030, 32 or whatever he'll talk about when he talks about expanding to 10 to 12, whatever teams. And to me, that's refreshing, right? You always hear these different groups with spring football talking about, oh, we're going to be here for such and such amount of years. But it seems like there's always like I don't want to say a hard cap on it, but like they have a number in their mind, like, hey, we can fund the league for this amount of time. And then if we don't like have, legitimate income coming in, then we might have some trouble or something like that. But to me, all of his messaging has always been, we're going to be here. And it's going to, whether you like it or not, we're going to make it work. And I like it a lot from his perspective, because that confidence, I think, is going to breed confidence in the fans, who, some people may be hesitant to come back to spring football and root for a league, because, in 2019 we had the AAF that folded midseason. In 2020 we had the XFL that folded midseason, and they're still kind of not sure, because in 2022 we had the USFL, and then by 2024 we had the UFL, and 8 teams going away, and there's been a lot of chaos and turnover in all these spring leagues. So I think maybe we're hitting a point where maybe the long-term view of the league starts drawing some fans in, because they're like, hey, this thing's been around for a couple of years. These teams are teams that I now recognize. I've seen them on ESPN, on Fox, on all ABC, and maybe it's time that I start investing some effort and some time and maybe some money into this league, as a fan. So it'll be interesting to track going forward, especially from what you made, the point you made, like a viewership perspective. Does this continue to grow? How does that affect the rights packages for the future and stuff like that? So why don't we kind of just jump into the TV ratings? I mean, do you have the numbers right offhand?
Yeah, I mean, so just for perspective about the media rights package, one of the biggest things that I wanted to discuss, and I don't have, I think I vaguely remember the share that I did in the chat. The UFL is averaging 630,000 viewers right now on a weekend basis. That's the average across all 4 games. To put that in perspective, the NBA or the NHL, I think, was just over 500,000, and that includes a media rights package that is covered by multiple channels as well. But the MLS one is the one that's the interesting one. And I know that the Apple deal is part of the problem when it comes to the MLS, but MLS is averaging like 120,000 viewers a week, or during their weekly, matchups or whatever. That media rights package, when it was sold to Apple TV, was $4 billion. Apple paid $4 billion to get the MLS on its streaming service, put the league pass behind a paywall, but still siphoned off certain games to the Fox. FS2, FS1 still shows some of the MLS games. The issue with this is the MLS, even on Fox, is still not bringing in amazing viewership standpoints. That is outlasting, the UFL at this point. The UFL is blowing them out of the water, and if you think about it, that $4 billion package deal for the MLS gives me hope that when the media rights package is up for the UFL, that they're going to get a pretty good offer. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be $4 billion, because let's be honest, the MLS soccer, their funds are a lot more, rooted in certain things. But I think that if you average 631,000 viewers and you're outbeating the NHL during the NHL playoff stretch, and I'd be very curious about what the NBA one is as well, in comparison to the UFL. It feels like that this league is finally catching its viewer and media rights package at the correct point. When Vince McMahon brought back the XFL, one of the things that he discussed and talked about was media. The attendance was great. He loved the attendance. The attendance was wonderful, but everything was media driven. Because if you take a look at the WWE and what he's done over years with the WWE, a lot of their money and a lot of their influx came from the media rights package, which brought in viewerships, which brought in sponsors, which brought in, all of that. And the WWE is making billions every year. So the UFL may have a very similar thought process of that as well. So seeing 631,000 on the average viewer, where you're outbeating the NHL and you're outbeating the MLS, and I guarantee they're probably very close to outbeating the NBA. Maybe not as NBA might be a little trickier because they're spread out over numerous different stations, and it's multiple, they have a lot more teams in retrospect and stuff, but they have to be close to the MLB at the very least, as well. So yeah, I don't know, man. I just feel like that this media rights, 631,000, I think it's showing that people do like spring football. I think people are finally starting to get it, and the stability of the league is going to be a large part of that. But they should be very happy with that number, in my opinion. And you figure out you factor in the media rights package. These are the people that they're competing against, not the NFL. Everybody wants to compare the UFL viewership to the NFL, and that's just not right, because they're not happening at the same time. If that was the case, the UFL would be buried. Let's be honest. It's just, they would be buried. But 631,000, when there's multiple other sports happening between multiple soccer leagues, hockey playoffs, NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball, I think that they should be very happy with that number, as it continues to increase, honestly.
100%. To your credit, I did a quick research or quick Google search. So, don't kill me if this number isn't 100% accurate, if you're watching right now. But according to Google AI, it says 1.78 million viewers is the average across ABC/ESPN, NBC/Peacock, and Amazon Prime Video for the NBA. You figure 1.7 million viewers for the biggest basketball league in the world, right? So that's one of the things that we're not really considering here when we're looking at the UFL versus the NHL versus the MLS versus the NBA. Those are the premier league in their individual sports in the world, right? So when we're talking about the UFL and they're getting 600,000 viewers and beating some of these leagues, and they're realistically, in some people's minds, the third largest football league, maybe even fourth if you really kind of consider the X League and their impact in Japan. It's impressive, really, because they are beating out a league like the CFL that's been around for forever, that has like an average of 400,000 and technically has an entire country that is, I don't want to say like dedicated, but like that's our football league, right? So
Right.
I think in the sense that the NFL has that backing in the US, Canada has that similar feeling with the CFL. So you would think those numbers would be a little bit higher in my mind than the UFL, that is kind of an upstart league, right? We just saw all these changes, and yet here we are at 600 plus thousand viewers every week. So I think that's an encouraging number. And like you said, regardless of what sport it is at this point, viewership breeds money. Whether it's your viewership numbers and breeding a bigger broadcast package or sponsorship packages or whatever it is, those numbers matter. So as long as they keep trending the right direction, I think we're the UFL and we as spring football fans are in good shape for the future, because once we start seeing that money roll in, that's when the league's really going to become sustainable. It's going to grow. We're going to get more teams, maybe potential individual owners down the line, and what have you.
That's going to be the key, is the individual owners, because I think that when you start seeing this media rights package and you start factoring in what could possibly happen, I think it's going to be more attractive from an ownership standpoint for a lot of these teams to find, independent owners, which I think eventually is probably the goal for the UFL. I think it's the goal for a lot of leagues, but you also have to be able to run a league, controlled teams for X amount of years before that's even going to hit that point. And to your credit, like, you talk about the NBA, you talk about MLB, you talk about, well, MLB maybe second best, but even then, though, the top Japan players still come over. So, NHL, for the most part, these are all like the top, leagues in the world of their, like, as far as money is concerned, in their specific retrospective sport. Whereas like the UFL, you can make a case is number 3 at the very best in the North American market if you put the CFL above them, because CFL's been around longer. But from a viewership standpoint, like, it appears that the UFL has surpassed the CFL on that front in North America. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. If I'm the UFL, I'm very happy with those viewership numbers, and fingers crossed that it just continues to grow and we continue to see stability, and maybe, like you said, in X amount of years, I think that we won't see individual owners until we hit at least 12 teams in the league, because then I think it will be a little more of a sustainable. I think it will be a little more appealing for owners to kind of come in then at a 12-team market than it would be, at like an 8 or 10 team market. But either way, they should be very happy with a lot of things that are happening this year for sure. Attendance is a different story.
Agreed. And to be fair, attendance did spike at the beginning of the season. Yes, the numbers have fallen, but here's a dirty little secret that I don't think any of us like to talk about and never really seem to get into when it comes to attendance. Attendance is always going to spike at the beginning of the season. It's always going to have a lull in the middle of the season, and it's always going to increase towards playoff time. It doesn't matter the sport, guys. It doesn't. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the sport. It really doesn't matter the amount of games, because there's always going to be games in the middle of every season, inevitably, that don't matter as much as the beginning or the end of the season, regardless of what sport it is. So I think like a lot of these attendance numbers dropping are a little overblown, because in my mind, the initial numbers for the league this year were so encouraging compared to leagues past or years past in the other league and prior to Rapoli joining, that I think it's really a large leap in the right direction. Yes, I know Houston's not showing out. Yes, I know there are some markets that need to be worked on and maybe need to go away. Maybe Houston is one of those. But at the end of the day, Louisville has shown out pretty well. St. Louis's numbers are kind of tapering off a little bit, but at the same time, they're still, 15 to 18,000 plus, and that's a market you can lean on. DC's done pretty well, although the numbers are falling off a little bit. But I think once 2027 rolls around and they have a full off season with Rapoli involved, he's stressed a couple times now. Local marketing is going to be a focus. So if we can get to that point, the attendance numbers will grow in my mind. So I think assuming that the TV viewership continues to grow, the monetary investment from ownership doesn't disappear overnight, a la the AAF. I think that we're probably going to be in a good situation for the long term with the UFL, specifically for Polish football.
I want to talk a little bit about the attendance numbers as well for certain markets, because Jonathan Klink, who has been a fan or is a friend of the show or has been on the show in the past, talks primarily about the CFL. He wrote an article about the attendance numbers, dwindling in certain markets recently. And I love Jonathan. I think Jonathan's fantastic. If you get a chance, go follow him. He's wonderful at what he does. He definitely is very, he looks at things from a different perspective. He's very unique in that front. But he talked about the attendance numbers in certain markets, and I didn't necessarily agree with some of the markets that he was particularly talking about. Like, Houston's always been a problem. I think Houston's going to be a problem no matter what. But I think the reason why there's a team in Houston is from a media standpoint. It's a massive media hotbed in Texas. It's very similar, and it's cheaper to run a team in Houston than it is like Los Angeles or New York, right? One of the things that the XFL did when it came back was it put a team in Houston, put a team in Los Angeles, put a team in New York because of the media hotbeds that those markets are in those specific states. It's the reason why I think Dallas is still around, even though people aren't showing out for Dallas as well. But I wanted to talk specifically about St. Louis and DC when it comes to attendance numbers kind of dwindling. For St. Louis, I can kind of understand a little bit this year because they moved Anthony Becht. Anthony Becht was literally loved in St. Louis. He was the beloved head coach. He was the guy who led the Battlehawks to a certain prominence in that city. It wasn't like a contract thing like you see in the NFL where he signed for 2 years and then they just didn't re-sign him. They literally just were like, we're going to move you to Orlando. So I can kind of understand St. Louis being a little salty, per se. They needed to find out what it was going to look like with Ricky Prohl. So a lot of people didn't buy their tickets necessarily as far in advance. We talked a little bit about St. Louis's makeup. They're a threat, but they're not a threat. Like, they're kind of like one of those weird in-between teams. For DC, and this is going to sound very, 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 very weird, but DC plays at Audi Field. And there are multiple teams who use Audi Field. The National Women's Soccer League Washington Spirit is it's a top-notch soccer organization in cross men or women in America, and they are beloved in DC. So I think that what we're seeing, and they've had a lot of success recently, they've been to 2 straight championship games. I think what we're seeing fans of spring sports in general kind of deciding how often they want to go to Audi Field and who do they want to go see. Because the Spirit bring in about the same amount, if not a little bit more, than what the Defenders bring in from an attendance standpoint, even when the Defenders were at 18,000, 19,000. So they are really bringing in a ton of and it's just speculation, but it's a very hotbed. DC is a very hotbed area for a lot of multiple teams. The DC Power of the USL Super League, they're starting to see their attendance spike a little bit. It's not as strong, it's not as heavy, but they're starting to see their attendance spike a little bit. So it's and I don't know how much of that plays into other factors when it comes to like certain sports. So St. Louis has the MLS. DC also has the DC United for the MLS as well. So that could play a part into why we're seeing a little bit at this particular moment. I don't suspect it's going to stay that way, though, because I agree with you. Spike at the beginning, kind of a lull in the middle. spike at the end. And I feel that a lot of that happens. It's so spread out, and there's so many attendance numbers for the top premier sports that it doesn't look as bad or amplified as it does for the UFL, unfortunately. Just a thought. I don't even know. It could be completely wrong on that front, but it got me thinking, because Houston's very much the same way. There's a lot of going on in Houston. There's a lot going on in Dallas in the spring. Like, you can catch multiple different sports at any given point in time in both those cities as well. But the media rights package alone in those cities where it's cheaper to run a team could play a part in why we're seeing struggling attendance numbers. They definitely do need to get the teams in those cities, though. I think
Yes.
that's going to be extremely important moving forward, and I hope Rapoli does that moving into 2027, because that will go a long way into helping the league sustain in those markets.
100% agree. And actually, I had never spent literally any time thinking about the whole point that you just made about Washington having a lot of sports and specifically teams that play at Audi Field. But to your credit, this week or next weekend, we've got in an 8-day span a DC United game, a Washington Spirit game, and a DC Defenders game. Literally from the 23rd to the 31st, and that's not counting the games that they've already had the past couple weeks. So it is very bunched up there, like where there's a lot of events back to back to back. So that could 100% affect attendance, and it's something that I didn't really consider. But there are 4 different teams that use Audi Field as their home, including DC Defenders. So that has to be a factor. It kind of has to be, right? We're talking about a day and age, and I don't want to turn this into an economy show or anything like that, but the economy's not great right now. Like we're talking about, I just read an article a couple days ago about concert venues seeing a dip in their attendance for music shows. So, I mean, if that's the case, then that's probably a bigger indicator of the fact that in-person events in general are going to see a dip in attendance because of the economic factors that are at play right now. So I think that there's a lot more at play here that we as sports fans don't consider or really look at a lot of times. To us, it's very black and white. They do this, it's going to mean this, but it never really, it doesn't seem like anybody, me and myself included, sees the entire picture and all the different factors that gets involved in all of these things, whether it's attendance, viewership, all the different ingredients that go into that pot that make the results what they are. So it's definitely interesting to kind of sit there and look at, your point and realize like, hey, there are 3 soccer teams, all of which who are probably playing around the same time as DC, and that are going to siphon some of that attendance away, and vice versa from DC off of some of those soccer teams. So that is kind of one of the unique factors with a lot of these teams using MLS stadiums now. Is that something that could negatively impact them long term? It'll be something to watch for sure. Like I said, something I had put absolutely no thought into until you had just brought that up. But
yeah, it really made me think about it, because I'm very much a big proponent of watching soccer, when there's no football on, and watching the women's leagues and watching the men's leagues when I get a chance to and stuff. And I watched the Washington Spirit of my team, and I was sitting there thinking about it, like, there are so many teams that play at Audi Field during this stretch that they're talking about putting a DC men's team in the USL Championship next year as well, to kind of give a little bit of a feeder, team to the MLS, possibly, if that's the case, or a USL Championship League, now that they have the relegation and delegation process, which means that will likely be another team at Audi Field. So it's just like there's so much going on there that it plays a factor, in my opinion, when you start using certain fields of that nature. And Audi is just a small example of it. I mean, I think that they could use an MLS stadium, moving forward. It's just, I think they're going to have to be picky and choosy in certain spots for for certain things. I don't know. Maybe, like I said, maybe it's not. But you brought up the economy factor of it, and that's very well abundant too. The economy, between travel prices, not even ticket prices, because the ticket prices are down for the most part for the UFL. But like, if you have to travel a little bit and then you stay at a place and then you factor in food, you factor in the price of certain things, like that could play a factor as well when the economy is struggling like it has been. So that's a very good point from your standpoint as well. So I think that maybe, we'll look forward to see what 2027 brings. We'll have to kind of keep an eye on what the economy looks like there too, and maybe there's a correlation there by all means.
I think it does. I think there will be long term, and I think right now we're just experiencing kind of a tough time, right, economically for every country. And I'm not going to sit here and get into why or anything like that, but I think there's a lot of people feeling the pinch right now. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next subject. But before we do, we're going to play a quick commercial break. Obviously, we unpacked a lot of stuff to talk about just now. We still have to review the games. We might talk a couple transaction things just because there's a few big ones. And then we will also discuss Louisville bringing in a new partner and something that I've noticed about the approach of the league this year that I wanted to get Michael's thoughts on. So stick with us, still a little bit to go.
This is Current. It's the card my parents used to pay me for mowing the lawn, running errands, and doing well in school.
Oh, wow.
This is the card I used when we got the idea to make our own clothes. And we spread the word, drove downtown, and sold everything we made. This is the card I used to do the things that really matter. This is Current. Visit current.com and download the app for free today.
How many times a week?
Like three or four times, maybe.
I gotta pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
I'm just being myself, cool as can be. When I'm being myself, you wish you were me. It's so easy. Get out your own way. It's just so easy.
All right, so this is the topic at hand at the moment. Louisville Kings have named a performance intelligence partner, and it must have had an immediate effect because they went out and won their game yesterday. So I honestly don't know a ton about this company. I was intrigued to see them bring in a midseason partner, but the main thing that sticks out about this move for Louisville to me is if you read the announcement by the league, they seem to emphasize that this was a move that Chris Redmond wanted to make, that this was something that he wanted to approach and bring in and thought would help. And to me, that was kind of a unique way of looking at things, because I think in the years past, with the UFL being a league owned and all their teams being league owned, you don't get really too many different approaches from coach to coach in terms of how they can approach their partners for a team and stuff like that. So in my mind, this stuck out as a kind of a different way for them to do business, in 2026, because like I said, previously, if there was a partner, it was a partner for everybody. Now this seems like it's very obviously very specific to the Kings, and it might turn into an eventual advantage for the Kings. So I'm curious to get your thoughts, like in 2026, it feels to me like they've kind of adopted some of that arena football approach where each team operates as an individual entity. They're each out there trying to create partnerships in their own markets and create a footprint, to where they can have some form of income or cost reduction based on those partnerships in their individual markets. So what do you think about that approach by the league and then also the naming of this partnership?
Oh, I mean, it's smart. I mean, at the end of the day, you need each individual team to have some sort of sponsor coming in, or some sort of local sponsor, or a sponsor based out of, the state or city that you're in, in order to elevate each individual team's profile, right? Like you need to do that if your ultimate goal is to draw in ownership groups. And that's the key part in this particular situation is you factor in that they have this deal now, and it looks like this deal doesn't just focus on what's happening on the field. It looks like it happens what's off the field as well. And it's a huge part to what a lot of athletes go through. You're talking about trainings and daily score recoveries and off the field guidance to maintain peak performance, which, to be honest with you, a lot of players kind of do their own thing. They hire people and they go through certain things. Some people use team things in the NFL level. But for the most part, players they're not obligated to. And I'm not saying that these guys are going to be obligated to, but this will definitely help certain players get to a point of reaching, their, peak spot in an area where it may be their, they're at the best level that they can be at this particular point in time. So, in their prime per se. So this is awesome, I think, for this as far as Louisville is concerned, because obviously this market has been fantastic for the league, and now you factor in a sponsorship of some sort, or partner, a equal partner of some sort, should draw a little more appeal to possible ownership groups if that's the ultimate end goal, as well. Now, as far as this particular company is concerned, I don't know much about it, but the fact that it's a data analytical business that focuses on performance and keeping players healthy, I think that's awesome. I think that's huge, and honestly, something that I'm surprised that the league wasn't like, we're going to implement to everybody, but at the same time, smart of the Kings organization, or however they approached it, in the sense of finding a localized market, or sponsor of some sort, or a partnership of some sort, because that's what these teams are going to need moving forward if they're going to sustain and be around for a long time under the UFL umbrella, and in these particular markets as well.
Agreed. And one thing that so let me just read a little excerpt from the actual league announcement, and shout out to our Sports Central for having this article up and easy to find. So I was able to kind of find a quick write up for this. But one of the statements in this write up that I really that made it all kind of click for me is BAIO is taking the level of analysis and insight that sports organizations at the highest levels who hire entire departments for, and packaging it into a single platform that will propel athletes into a new level of performance and optimization. So essentially, this is the way for the UFL to get, obviously not necessarily to the NFL extent, but NFL quality organizations are NFL quality care and analytics packaged into the league without them having to hire full teams of people to make it happen. Instead they go to this outside company, they create a partnership. That company then gets the perk of being mentioned all over in social media, and then on shows like this, and then at the same time it saves the league a little bit on cost for that specific market. So I think that's kind of a big deal for Louisville going forward. Chris checking in says, which UFL coaches do you expect to be let go at the end of the season? This is a really good question, because I had not thought that far ahead, but we are already heading into week 9, so we are nearing that point.
I'm going to say none of them. I am going to say that if they do let go of someone, the highest likely individual that they're going to let go of would be Tenkid Jr. And I think that that's more just because of the off the field stuff that happened in the middle of the season than it is necessarily even a performance standpoint, per se, because even though Columbus is the bottom half of the league, they've still been competitive in a lot of games. So I can't even sit here and say that I'm even sure that they're going to let him go for the off the field stuff. He missed a game. They let Todd Haley coach. So, maybe that was punishment enough. Maybe there was an internal fine or something. I mean, the league doesn't have to, they're not obligated to let us know, what happens internally. But I really honestly don't think that they're going to let anybody go. And I think that it'd be smart necessarily not to let anybody go. But if there was one, I would probably say Ted Ginn.
That's a good point. Yeah, when I look across the league, I mean, I guess you could say Kevin Sumlin, just specifically because Houston's performance hasn't been up to snuff, for his experience level. I do think Ted Ginn's probably the most likely one as well. But to your credit, you mentioned they've been competitive in a lot of games they've lost. There's been at least 2 games that they only lost by 1 score. So I mean they're at the bottom of the league, but they've been, like you said, very competitive in those games. It's not like they're getting blown out in every game either. Now they did lose 2 games by 2 scores as well, so there is that. But I think I'm with you. I could see a scenario where all 8 coaches return. I could see a scenario where if coaches leave, it's on their own accord and it's not the league necessarily deciding, hey, we're going to get rid of you. But I think that at this specific moment, the league probably understands there's value in not turning everything over again, a year later. So I'm hoping that we see a lot of stability in the coaching staff. And maybe if anything, if a guy like Ted Ginn does leave, do you turn around and promote a Todd Haley and just let him run the team again? He's already got that familiarity with coaching a spring football team before. He's got that involvement in the USFL in the past, so maybe that makes sense. But at the same time, I mean, it would not shock me at all, like you said, if all 8 come back in 2027. So.
I just think it would be smart from, again, a strategic standpoint for the league and the way that the league has been stabilizing stuff to give this particular batch of head coaches 3 years in each market. If your goal is to bring people in, work on the attendance, and bring stability to spring football, outside of them getting a really good lucrative offer at the college level, I think the league itself would be smart not to personally remove anybody for at least 3 years.
That's probably not a bad idea, especially considering the fact that this particular moment right now, almost every one of these coaches has some sort of tie to the market they're in. So that makes even more sense why you want to keep those guys around, let them build on some of the community relation stuff that they're doing already, given that a lot of these guys do, in fact, live in the markets that they're coaching out of currently. Ted Ginn and Chris Redmond and Anthony Becht and guys like that who are physically from Florida or Ohio or Kentucky. So I think that is a big reason why you would see some of these guys stick around as well. So
I just don't think, AJ McCarron had big shoes to fill in Birmingham. Columbus has a chance to win today and go to 3 wins, which means every team in the league will have 3 or more wins, which is huge for the league standpoint. So it just, Kevin Sumlin, yeah, you can make the case for Houston, but Houston also, once again, has had 4 different quarterbacks start for them this year. So, they've gone through injury issues just like St. Louis has with Ricky Prohl, and, the Kings are 4-4, the Dallas Renegades with Rick Neuheisel, that situation needs to be studied. That there needs to be a case study done on Dallas and what happened this year, because the first 3 games, they looked like they were going to sail to an undefeated season, and then these last 5 games have been absolutely dreadful. They're on a 5-game skid, right, or a 4-game skid. Like, they were the highest scoring team. They went from being, it's like a 20-point differential, I think, on average from the first 3 weeks to these last 5 weeks, and the defense has gotten worse too. So there has to be a case study done as to what happened there, because it's strange. It's very odd, and I don't know if it's an Austin Reed experiment that's just starting to rear its ugly head because he's a gunslinger or what. But that team looked like it was well on its way to a championship caliber season, and now they're 3-5. So something happened.
Yeah.
Not pretty. Not pretty.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Champ Clyde Emerson is tuning in. He says 2 years and 2 years. I assume referring to the contract for head coaches. And remember, the head coaches are hired throughout the year; they're not seasonal. So probably even more reason why they stick around, right? If they're
Right. Yeah.
year-round employees and continuing to work in their markets or build the roster or whatever it may be. So. Great points, Champ. Appreciate you tuning in this morning and being here with us this morning. So we're going to run down some quick transactional information, and I'm just going to throw them out there. If there's somebody that you kind of want to talk about, feel free to jump in. But Columbus made a series of moves over the past couple of days. They signed defensive end Cyrus Webster and defensive end Jacoby Windman. They released defensive back Leon O'Neal Jr., who has turned around and signed with the Orlando Pirates again. So Perrion Winfrey was cut again this season. Second time he's been cut. He was previously cut by the Stallions as well. So kind of wonder if there isn't something behind the scenes going on there with him. And they also cut a pair of kickers, Jonas Dalmas and Ryan Coe. So I honestly would have to look to see who their kicker is right now. Birmingham signed 2 players, Brian Dooley, an offensive lineman, and wide receiver Keurig McGowan. Orlando had signed Kanai Magua. Hopefully I have that last name correct. He was inactive Friday, but he was brought in because of the fact that Tavante Beckett moved to IR. And then finally, the big blow to Dallas, Deontay Burnett has been moved to injured reserve. So a couple moves there. Anything that sticks out to you in particular?
Not really. I mean, Perrion Winfrey, there's definitely something happening there. When everything happened with Birmingham, these players, they have to stay away from social media when they're in their big feels. But he posted on social media kind of, some negative comments about Dallas and the coaching staff, and then he got signed almost immediately, which the talent is there. It's got to be something going on with the mentals. I hate saying that about another individual when I don't know their actual personal situation that's happening, but it just feels like with his talent, something's not matching up, something's not clicking for him. He should be on a UFL roster at the very least in some capacity. So there's definitely something happening there, and he needs to figure that out from that standpoint. But yeah, no, I mean, Deontay Burnett, obviously a big loss for Dallas, high profile wide receiver. He's been, one of the more stable, hands on that team. And the fact that you lose, you're pretty much your top wide receiver, down the stretch here, it's pretty brutal for sure.
Agreed. One more move that I actually missed on my list here. Michael Pratt has been released again by the St. Louis Battlehawks. So speaking of players that have a little weirdness going on around them, Michael Pratt has been signed and released by St. Louis, I think 3 times this season already, if I'm not mistaken. So really weird situation there. Although I will point out that St. Louis did just acquire Luis Perez, in a trade. And I think they probably kept Pratt around this past week just in case they needed him and didn't activate Perez, because they do have Silvers and Frost there on the roster as well. So kind of an interesting move, but at the same time, probably just a precautionary thing that he was around in the first place at this point. So with that being said, we can kind of move forward and talk about the review and the preview of the games. We don't have to spend a ton of time on any of these games per se, but Orlando did defeat Dallas 31-24. One of the big things that I wanted to talk about in that game was that the fact that this was at Fort Hood. It was on a military base, which was a really cool thought in my mind, and it also ended up producing a really, really cool storyline that came out of the game when Seth Green scored a touchdown in front of his father, who is stationed at Fort Hood. So I mean, I don't know if I'm sure they knew that ahead of time before the game, but I don't know if he had a factor in them going there to play the game or whatever it was, but that was a really cool moment, really cool story, and really cool that they were able to bring his father on the field for a in-game interview. But I wanted to get your thoughts. Like, what did you think about the Fort Hood game overall? Just a gut feeling, top to bottom. How do you feel about that thought?
I think this is something that the league needs to do more of, to be honest with you. Like, I understand that, from an aesthetic standpoint, it may not have been the most appealing on TV, but this is the type of stuff that you do in areas that are near you that generate interest in your league and generate um, a cool storylines and brings eyes to the product overall. This is the type of stuff that you do. So I think it was a really great move. And honestly, I mentioned that it was a respectable crowd for a Dallas game because honestly, it was. I mean, it may not have been a wonderful crowd by any means, but that's what we've been seeing out of Dallas for the most part, anyways. So if you're going to do it on a smaller venue to make it look a little bit better aesthetically, but also the storylines and that storyline drew attention from multiple different media outlets, and the game being at Fort Hood drew eyes from a media standpoint on a national level as well from a sporting world. So that's actually really cool. That's really kind of like what you want to see for a league like this. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they did small things along that lines in each market every year, maybe one or two. You don't have to do it every week and you don't have to do it with every team every year, but stepping outside of the venue that you have to secure a spot that's very similar to this, that you can put something together and call it, whatever, kind of like how NHL has that outside game every year in the middle of the year. You can do something along those lines where it kind of becomes an annual thing for certain teams in certain areas, and you call it, whatever you want. Almost how like the Thanksgiving Day game started in the, in football in the NFL. Like you can do something very similar to that. Call it a classic of this, or whatever it may be. The Fort Hood Classic, for Dallas. Something along those lines. So I would like to see them try to do it in each individual market or somewhere around each individual market, because I think that would be kind of cool, especially in Birmingham, where the attendance has been much better this year. The fans rally around the team to support it, to keep it in Birmingham. But I still feel like there's still room for improvement in Birmingham, considering the success that this team has had in the past. So just certain areas, find something that you can market and follow through with it, and kind of make it, if not an annual thing, maybe a biannual thing of some sort.
Agreed. And one of the things that you kind of glossed over there a little bit, but you did mention, and I wanted to kind of highlight a little bit, is that Dallas has not had the greatest showing in terms of home games so far this season. So that gave you a little bit of room to experiment, and maybe it's a flop. But at the same time, right now, it's not like the home games are super big money producers for them anyway. I will say that, this also provided them a captured audience, which I think is kind of a unique situation for a sports game. Like, how often can you go somewhere where, there's limited entertainment options on that base, right? So to me, it's more likely that those, the armed forces members are going to go to the game because it's right there. It's easy for them to access, and it's probably fairly affordable given that, they are military members and it is on their base. But with that being the case, I did notice that there was a story that was kicking around a little bit on Twitter, and some people blew it out of proportion, and I think they got a little bit more upset about it than maybe I felt was fair. But there was a couple that apparently tried to attend the game at Fort Hood. They are current season ticket holders for the Dallas Renegades, and apparently they were turned away because the fact that, well, first of all, it's a military base, but apparently they were actually able to get onto the military base, but the tickets for the game itself were sold out. So I'm not sure exactly how that situation all unfolded, how they were able to get onto a military base without a valid reason, or maybe it was just miscommunication at the front gate or whatever it may be. But a lot of people seemed upset over it. But if you read the press release on the game in general, it said from I think it was like the first line in the press release, tickets will be extremely limited for these games. because of the fact that it's on an armed forces base. They can't just be letting everybody on there. But at the same time, is that a concern for you? I mean, if you have season ticket holders that are now upset because of situations like this, do you think that's a problem for the league? Do you think maybe they just need to improve the messaging? I mean, how would you approach that situation?
Well, I mean, from a league perspective, like if you are offering season tickets for home ticket holders, I think part of those tickets should have been available for those people on the at Fort Hood. But at the same time, on the flip side of things, this is the first time that they've done something like this, and those small nuances could have been an oversight on the league. If the league reaches out to the couple or has reached out to I mean, obviously we haven't heard anything yet, or at least I don't believe so, and makes it right with them as far as it's concerned, maybe they get a, first rights to season tickets next year at a discounted price or whatever it may be. As long as the league does something to make it right for them for this, because they did travel to Fort Hood to see the game, which should have been a home game, then I don't think the couple / the league are going to come out of this with a terrible image. I just think it's something that needs to be corrected moving forward, that if you do have season ticket holders and you are off your venue, they should still have the rights to those limited tickets, no matter how limited they are. Put them through a rigorous security check. I mean, how hard is it to put just one purse? We're going to look through your purse. You go through a metal detector. Like you get it at local events for the most part anyway. So you could find ways around that to make sure that everything's secure and safe as well. But if they travel to Fort Hood, chances are they aren't going there to cause any issues other than watch a football game at that particular moment in time anyway. So if the league corrects it, then cool, that's awesome. And I think that that's something that should be done. But I think the couple has every right to be mad. I think there's a lot of keyboard warriors and chest bumpers that happen behind screens that get angry for people, and it's like, you don't know what the interaction happened between them and the league was. The league very well could have corrected it on the spot that day or that evening, for all we know. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make the media. The UFL is not the NFL where everything is friggin' exposed because there's numerous reporters. But I'm sure that I have no doubts that I think the league will probably take care of it in some capacity. And hopefully it's an agreeable manner between the couple and the league, and they can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really simple solution, or I mean, a simple situation to fix, right? You credit the family that traveled to Fort Hood to try to go to that game. You credit them $20, $30, $40, whatever it may be, that would be that equivalent to that game ticket for their season tickets. Throw them some merch, send them a shirt, with the Dallas Renegades logo on it or something. Those are the fans that you want involved in the league. You want them happy because they traveled to go see their team, right? So, I mean, that's exactly who you want involved and who you want rooting for your teams in this league anyway. So I think that, like you said, this is something the league needs to continue doing moving forward. I think they need to emphasize it, much like you said, make it a classic, a bowl game, whatever, find a one-off sponsor for it, so you can have the Chick-fil-A Fort Hood Bowl or whatever, kind of like, the college football games do. But I think it would make a lot of sense for multiple reasons going forward, because you have an external reason now why you're able to promote this game to a different audience, why you might be able to draw in people who would not necessarily go to a UFL game in the first place. So I think it's a really good move by the league. I think, like you said, there's always going to be bumps and bruises the first time you try anything. So I think that's probably a learning experience for the league as well. So
yeah, probably just a slight oversight that they didn't think about at the time and didn't realize that it was going to kind of alienate some people. And, I think they'll correct it and move forward from it. And, like I said, even if it's just like giving, them a discounted price on 2 of the home games next year or something, like, do something to keep them around and make sure that you are reaching out to them, though.
Agreed. Even if you have to comp them season tickets for next year, I mean, that's a drop in the bucket comparatively. And like I said, you keep fans engaged. How you react to negative situations as a company sometimes means way more than it does when you're, what you're doing during all systems go and when everything's operating as it should, right? So to me, I think if you go out and you kind of overcorrect and, you give the fans something and you address the situation and you put it out there, I think it's only going to pay off dividends in the long term because fans are going to see that you're trying to make an effort. But moving on, we had a couple of underdogs kind of win their games this weekend, which was a little bit surprising. I don't think most people had Louisville defeating DC this weekend or Houston outlasting St. Louis. But I wanted to get your takes on the game. I mean, overall by Louisville, what were your thoughts on their performance, how they came out on offense, and then also how they were able to just kind of weather the storm against one of the better teams in the league, despite the fact that they have kind of been walked all over at times?
So this is going to be interesting, a very interesting perspective, because I'm a DC fan, so this is going to sound really extremely biased, and I'm telling you it's not from a biased perspective at all, but DC gave this game away. If you go and take a look at the overall deeper analytics of this game, DC gave this game away with their penalties. Defensive penalties killed DC. Louisville ran 60 plays in comparison to 57 from DC, and they had less yardage than DC by almost 100 yards. They averaged less yards per play than DC did as well. So, but 9 penalties came out of this game for DC for a large amount of yards. A lot of them were drive extenders. A lot of them were issues with, the secondary, whatever it may be from that perspective. But, you're talking yards per play were, 4.2 for Louisville. They had 6 penalties for 43 yards, but their third down efficiency was the killer. They were 9 for 15. DC couldn't get off the field on any which way, shape, or form when it came to, this game. The defense gave this game away. Even Spencer Sanders didn't play that bad. He went 7 for 15 for 83 yards. So, Louisville did what Louisville needed to do. They scored 33 points against one of the best teams in the league. But this is what we've seen from a Greg Williams-esque type defense, because it's his son, it's Blake Williams, so it's basically Greg. And in years past, and last year we went through this lull with DC as well. There was like a 2 or 3 game stretch where the defense looked really shoddy before it kind of, tightened back up and they went on their run. Louisville looked solid for what it was, but I feel like this game was particularly more DC giving it away than it was necessarily Louisville winning this game per se.
That's a fair assessment. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, DC threw 3 interceptions. So, I mean, that was a big factor in why they ended up losing the game. On the flip side,
the first Tiamu interception was brutal. That was ugly. That was probably one of the ugliest interceptions I've ever seen Tiamu throw. Like, I don't know what he was looking at. I don't know what he was doing. And I think they went for a pick 6 too, so that makes it even worse.
No, you're right. Honestly, I don't think any of the interceptions were. Could I sit there and explain it away? Like, there was one that got thrown straight to a defender, and I didn't even see a receiver within a couple yards of him. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I think Chandler Rogers' interception was pretty bad as well, if I remember correctly. But one thing I did want to throw out there, though, is I did notice a flaw during the broadcast. They had Jamie Sharper listed as the defensive coordinator for DC for 23 through 25. But as I'm sure you know, Sharper was not the DC. He was the special teams coordinator and linebacker coach. So I thought it was kind of funny, because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like watching the broadcast, and I'm like, wait a minute, wasn't Greg Williams in DC before? And then, wait a minute, isn't Blake Williams there? Didn't he finish out last season as the defensive coordinator? I'm like, wait a minute, what is going on here? But to his credit, I did want to say that Jamie Sharper called a really, really good game last night. As one of his first opportunities to kind of be a defensive coordinator. I think he's doing a great job so far this season. And he really, really had DC on its heels at times. You know, they were producing a lot of pressure. They were getting into the backfield on the run game at times. Although I will say, averaging 6.4 yards per carry and allowing 218 rushing yards, that definitely needs work. But overall, I think that the overall body of work for them yesterday was a solid performance, although there is room for improvement as well. But I did want to also throw out there that to me, watching Louisville yesterday, it was a vintage Baltimore Ravens. You know, they were running the ball a lot, extra offensive linemen, playing defense, you know. It was a lot of fun to kind of sit there and watch. And to me, it was just like watching the 2001 Ravens all over again. So I had a good time watching all these games this weekend because they were all very competitive. None of them were blowouts. You know, at no point was the losing team out of the game. And, you know, I think that's what we all want as football fans at the end of the day. We want games that are exciting, that keep us on the edge of our seats, and that, you know, one big play can change the entire momentum of a game. But moving on to the Houston game, was there any observations or anything you wanted to get out there about Houston winning this game?
No, I mean, I think this just goes back to the parity of the league and the way that the league has been set up. You know, Houston's been competitive at times, and they've had, you know, games that have been close. And St. Louis is one of those teams that we talked about. We spent a lot of time talking about in the front half of the show that, you know, they're a threat, but they're not a threat. Like, we don't know where they really kind of stand. Like, you know, they could be a dangerous team, but they could also just go out and lay an egg. And they were competitive in this game, but this game was sloppy. If I remember correctly, I think there was like 6 turnovers in the first 3 quarters or something from both teams, or it was not a pretty game. And Houston came out on top from that. So that's something that I think both teams are going to need to clean up moving forward, kind of like DC and their penalty issues, you know, to move to be able to even make a run if that's what's going to happen here. Because with 2 games left, you got 2 teams sitting at 5-3. Louisville's 4-4. You got 3 teams at 3-5 and 1 team at 2-4. Or no, sorry, 3-4 and 2-5, and an opportunity today to make 3 teams at 3-5, or all 4 teams at 3-5, or something like that. So nobody's added this yet, especially if the Aviators beat the Stallions today. You know, nobody's added this for that last playoff spot. And you could see a team like DC and St. Louis, if they don't get their shit together, slip out of the playoffs suddenly, depending on how their tiebreakers go and whatnot. So they have to be careful, you know, from that perspective. So, but yeah, I don't know what to make of the St. Louis team, but it was a very sloppy game, and if they want to make the playoffs, they're going to have to clean it up. So,
agreed. And to your credit, the first few drives for St. Louis ended in a field goal, an interception, another field goal, 2 punts, and a field goal before half. Meanwhile, Houston came out. They had 2 punts, 2 touchdowns, and an interception in the first half. Then in the second half, they had 4 straight drives end with punts. And then on the flip side, St. Louis had 4 drives in a row where it was 5 drives in a row where it was a missed field goal, a punt, an interception. They scored a touchdown, and then they gave it over on downs. So you want to talk about a sloppy game, it doesn't get much sloppier than this game. So while it was competitive, it was fun. The game, you know, was still very much in hand for St. Louis all the way until the end. It was definitely not the prettiest game out there, that's for sure. But we have one more game for this weekend that we're going to preview real briefly. And to do so, I wanted to pull up these betting odds for you all at home. And with that being said, we have Columbus at Birmingham, which should make for a very interesting game. Columbus has recently found a couple victories, and they seem to be trending the right direction. Birmingham, however, seems to be trending the opposite direction, and seems to have hit a slide a little bit here over the last couple games. So I'm curious, did you bet on this game?
I haven't yet. I will probably put it in with a mixture of the indoor football league game that happens today as well, and maybe a couple of soccer games. Try to do like a little 4 or 5 leg parlay, throw like $7 on it, and try to hopefully make 100 plus. This game is interesting because it comes down to two teams that don't really have an identity. You know, if you take a look at Birmingham, you take a look at Columbus. In years past, Birmingham has an identity, but this year, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the coaching change and the philosophy or what, but there's no identity with this team. Like, you can't take Birmingham and be like, oh, they're going to smash mouth you, or oh, they're Birmingham, they're going to throw the ball all over you with all their weapons and playmakers. When we were going into the season, Birmingham looked like they had one of the best wide receiving groups in the UFL. And none of it has panned out the way that we all thought it would. You know, whether it's been a quarterback play, or which was interesting because AJ McCarron's the head coach, or you know, various other reasons, they just don't truly have an identity. I don't know what to expect from this team. It's the same with Columbus. Like, even with Todd Haley, like, usually you know what a Todd Haley offense looks like. This doesn't look like a Todd Haley offense. At least to me, it doesn't. I don't know if it's just because he's trying to do something that he's unfamiliar with, or what, but it just doesn't feel like a Todd Haley type of offense. So with that being said, I think there's a very good chance that the Aviators could win this game. Now, I'm going to take Birmingham, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than people may necessarily think. So if I'm a betting man, which I am, I would probably take Columbus with the plus 2.5 if I'm going to bet this, and it's probably going to hit the under if you're an under-over better instead. I don't expect this to be a very high-scoring game. I do expect it to be a competitive, you know, defensive game that might come down to a turnover late in the fourth that will determine, you know, whether it's a field goal victory or whatever. But I would take Columbus plus 2.5, which is usually dangerous because, you know, 17-14 type game will cause you to lose that. But I think this game's going to be something like 20-19. I think it's going to be like a 1-point type game. It's going to be very back and forth. Probably not a whole lot of offense, but I could be wrong, though. I mean, the quarterback scrambling ability in Columbus is off the charts. They got one of the best scramblers in the game. But I'm going to take Birmingham straight up if I'm going money line, but I'm going to take Columbus plus 2.5 if I'm going to bet on the game.
I like it. I like it. Gave me a lot to think about because I had not yet bet on this game either. I put all my money on the indoor football league games and won a little bit, so I'll be able to bet on this game later on. But I think I will probably parlay the under and take the Aviators money line.
Yeah, I mean that's
odds.
I mean, the odds are great there, and Columbus could win this game. So I wouldn't. I mean, I don't think I would fault anybody taking a Columbus ML on a bet at all.
It'll be an interesting game for sure. You know, like I said, they're both on different trajectories, so we'll see exactly how it all works out for them. But obviously, as you guys can tell, they do not currently have next week's games on here yet. Probably trying to avoid some confusion for fans that are, you know, looking to make their bets right now. But with that being said, there still are a couple games that will happen before our next show. We do have a Sunday night doubleheader next week, so we only have 2 more games that we're going to discuss this week before we wrap this bad boy up for the day. It's already been a little bit longer show than we normally go for, but that's all right. Let me pull up this tab. Here we go. So there we go. We have the week 9 games. It does not seem like we should already be in week 9. It's quite insane to me that we're already this far through the season. But with that being said, we've got a Friday night game, DC at Orlando, which should, in my mind, be the game of the week next week. I mean, that I don't know who else you'd possibly want to watch over those two teams. So with that being said, what are your thoughts on this game in particular? Does DC steal one on the road?
They're going to need to. I mean, it's probably the biggest game of the Defenders of the season here, and they're going to need to find a way to. They're going to have to find a way to make it work if they want to try to gained momentum back for the last 2 weeks of defensively just not being as sharp. They definitely got to clean up the penalties because Orlando and Anthony Becht will take care of that real fast. The one thing that Orlando has in both Orlando losses was the run game. The run game absolutely torched them. They were not able to stop. I believe it was Columbus when Columbus ran the ball 40 plus times. I think that was against Orlando, wasn't it? Or was that against St. Louis? It was crazy. It was one of those. I think it was Orlando.
Let me double check. I think you're right. It might have been St. Louis.
Okay, but either way, like Orlando's run defense has not been as prominent as I would like to see, and DC runs the ball really, really, really well. With that said, I'm going to take Orlando, but I'm going to put them on upset alert against DC. I think DC could win this game because of that run game. So I don't have a score prediction off the top of my head, but I expect that it's probably going to be something like 28-24.
Interesting. I was expecting you to pick DC. I actually already wrote it out on our little pick sheet.
I mean, they're my team. I'm going to be rooting for them. I think they can win this game. I think they're very capable of winning this game. It's possible Orlando kind of takes their foot off the gas a little bit because they're already in the playoffs. But I think that first seed is going to be important to them.
Yes.
So maybe they just put distance between them and a team that could easily take the 1 seed from them. But I think Orlando's going to win just because I don't think that they're going to take the foot off the gas this week. If this was the week after in week 10, it might be a different story. But
Fair point. And did just double check. It was not against St. Louis when.
What was the Orlando upset that happened down in Orlando? Was that Louisville?
Let me check real quick.
I know they have 2 losses, but I think one of them came from a team that nobody expected it to come from.
They lost against St. Louis and they lost against Birmingham.
So maybe it was Birmingham. I don't, or St. Louis maybe in Orlando. It might have been St. Louis in Orlando, but I think whichever game it was Orlando was at home. I know that for sure, and they got kind of drubbed because of the run game, and I think that that's going to benefit DC. So,
gotcha. It probably was that St. Louis game, but not super important either way. Interesting. I'm actually picking Orlando. I think that right now I like a lot of what Jack Plummer is doing. He's playing really, really well. His mobility and his size definitely helps what Orlando likes to do on offense there. I also think they're the best team in the league, and I don't think it's really all that close. I think their record actually kind of sells them a bit short for what they've been doing so far this year. So I'm definitely picking Orlando in this game. Moving on to the Saturday game, we've got Birmingham at Columbus. So a flip-flop of this week or tonight's game, Columbus at Birmingham. So you picked Birmingham, correct?
I picked Birmingham tonight but Columbus could easily win it. I picked Birmingham though.
Does the fact that Columbus is at home next week change your mind at all?
It depends on the outcome of this game. Because if Columbus, it's weird. It's a weird thing because the way that I'm looking at the game is if Columbus wins today, it puts them and Birmingham both at 3-5 heading into week 9, which means that they're both still in playoff contention. But this is a playoff eliminator game if Columbus wins today. If Columbus loses today, it effectively will eliminate the Aviators from playoff contention. So it could change the dynamic of how the game is played. They could be playing spoiler. Birmingham could come in and need this win to put themselves in a better spot for the playoffs. You see what I'm saying? So because I picked Birmingham, I'm going to pick Birmingham again next week. But the outcome of this game today is actually going to be key, in my opinion, to what's going to happen next week. Because playoff football, when you start getting close to playoff football and you're sniffing it, you play much differently than you do if you're eliminated. So,
Good point. So
if you picked Columbus this week, there's a good chance that Columbus could win 2 weeks in a row. Is what I'm saying, because I picked Birmingham this week. So based on my prediction being correct, I'm picking Birmingham next week because it's going to be a must-win for them, where Columbus will be eliminated from the playoffs.
Makes sense. That's where I was assuming you to lean after that explanation, but I wanted to double check that I had that correct there.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is, though, is because it changes the way you approach the game. You know, Columbus may want to play spoiler, but just because you play spoiler doesn't necessarily mean anything. You know, you're not playing for anything other than just to be a spoiler. So, and it's not like it's the Cowboys Commanders rivalry or anything. So it's not like you know what I mean? Like, players aren't going to get amped up for it, you know?
Excuse me, that is fair. So I'm actually on the flip side of that. I think I'm going with Columbus this week against Birmingham, and I very much agree that I think whatever team wins that game, it's going to do wonders for their confidence heading into the following game, which should in turn, end up being a victory. Especially, I think if Columbus takes one on the road against Birmingham, then I feel a lot better about their chances to win at home next week.
If I had picked Columbus today, I would be picking Columbus again.
No.
I think it's going to be a season sweep for whoever wins today. I don't think it's going to be one of those splits. But it all really just depends on the dynamic of the situation. Because, like I said, if Columbus does lose today, then they're eliminated from the playoffs. So you have to base that pick based off your prediction for today being correct. Is essentially why I went with Birmingham for the second pick.
Completely fair. Any other final thoughts or anything you wanted to get to before we get out of here for the day?
No. I think it's been a great season so far. I think the UFL should be very happy with a lot of the things. I mean, obviously, there's still some things to clean up and work on, but I think we're finally trending in the right direction with a clear path, something that we did not have with the UFL in the first 3 years. So I think, it's a lot of credit, to the front office, league management, not just Mike Rapoli, just league management as a whole, for, getting Rapoli on board and then, internally restructuring a lot of what the league was doing to be able to, land 3 really decent markets. Orlando still has some attendance things, but I understand the hesitancy there. And from what I understand, Rapoli and company understood the hesitancy there as well. So they're trying to be patient with that market. So that's good news. That's good for the city of Orlando, and it's exactly what Orlando needs. But other than that, man, we're heading into the playoff stretch, and I need my defenders to turn it around. Other than that, I think it's been a great year so far, and I'm excited to see what happens in the next few weeks.
Agreed. And like I said, season's flying by fast. So, I mean, we're damn near to the playoffs. I mean, we've talked a lot about it this episode, but I'm going to harp on it one last time. I mean, if you've been waiting for spring football to be stable, to jump on board and find your team and start getting involved and invested in some of these teams that are around, I mean, now's the time. It's year 5 of spring football consistently being around since 2022. We've had, the USFL or the XFL or the UFL or some combination thereof. It's time. It's not going around or not going away overnight like we have experienced in the past. And it's been a while now. We can kind of start getting comfortable with the fact that the UFL is probably going to be around for the long term. So, I'm hoping more and more fans just jump on board and realize that there's great football being played in the spring, and not just by the UFL, also by the EFA, which just kicked off another game right now.
Just get ready to plug them. Yeah, that's awesome.
So,
I'm glad we're on the same thing.
Dropped the link in the chat if you want to watch some early morning football for you guys. Let me check real quick. The Raiders tie roll at the Munich Ravens, and they literally just started the game. So perfect time for you guys to hop over and watch. Shout out to them. Speaking of which, I was just looking while we were talking, and 77,000 views on last night's game.
Yep.
And I haven't even watched it yet. So
Yep.
insane. And that's YouTube. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said they were also being broadcast on Fubo?
So they are, the EFA has the Fubo Sports channel. It's not the Fubo Sports, so you don't need to buy the package. It's the Fubo Sports channel, which is streamed on like multiple live TV options, Prime, Roku, any of those free services, Tubi. Like, you go to the live and you have the scroll. They're viewed there as well. But the easiest option is their YouTube channel, the EFA. It's the European Football Alliance. They have their own YouTube channel where it's American announcers. It's a very Americanized game. So it brings in American viewership. So if you love football and you love outdoor football specifically, because let's be honest, indoor and arena football happens this time of year too, and it's a lot of action in it as well. ShadySports Network, we obviously cover a lot here with that as well, but I want to make sure to give love to the indoor game too, because I do love it as well. But the EFA is this week. Next week, it's the American Football League of Europe. It's another outdoor league of Americanized football as well. Their channel will be airing all the games on YouTube as well for free. So there's no subscription involved with that either. It's the AFLE. Basically what happens was the primary league in the European League of Football split into two, and we have two leagues that are born out of it. And from everything that I'm understanding, both leagues are fairly stable for once. We'll see what happens moving forward and as the season goes on, if that stays that way. But if you want more outdoor football, EFA right now, their third game this week is coming up, YouTube, and then next week we'll have more games because the AFLE will be starting their season as well. So there's plenty of football to go around, and by all means. So without subscriptions, if that's a big thing for you. So
agreed. And honestly, I think I'm biased. It's super freaking cool that I can go sit down after the show and eat breakfast and watch football. So I really like early morning games, and I know really the only time we get them is when we're watching football overseas. So there is that benefit, if you're a football fan like me that likes to watch the early morning football, then the game's on right now. You can kick back and drink a cup of coffee if that's what you do, and like I said, eat your breakfast and watch some football and some good football at that, because let's be real honest, there is a lot of talent in that league, or in both of those leagues really. So make sure you're paying attention. Nordic Storm, congratulations on your win yesterday. It looked like you guys were pretty freaking dominant. So Randy, if you happen to watch this, we're still rooting for you, buddy.
I talked to Randy yesterday, actually, a little bit about the game. So yeah,
I meant to send him a text message, so I'll have to text him today and say congratulations. Last time I talked to him, he wasn't even entirely sure when the season was going to kick off or anything, so it's been a little while. But thank you to everybody who tuned in today. I know it's been kind of a paltry audience, and that's kind of our fault. We haven't been very consistent. So hopefully we can nail out the rest of the season and be here every week. So I know I don't have any more travel plans coming up, so I should be available for the rest of the foreseeable future in terms of this show. And then keep in mind that fairly soon after the CFL or UFL season ends, we will be, also carrying on this coverage with the CFL. So if you're a CFL fan, the season's coming up on us really quick. Training camp's in session right now, so cuts are already starting to happen and stuff like that. So we will have preseason games coming up over the next couple of weeks as well. So tons of coverage coming out of Shady Sports Network as always. And like Michael said, we also cover indoor football. So if you're a fan of that stuff, check us out Saturday mornings. Haven't quite hammered out the details of the CFL show and what time it's going to start and when it's going to be, but we'll get that all out to you guys over the next couple of weeks. And as always, we appreciate you guys watching, and we will catch you next Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Enjoy the game.
Yo, what's good? Cedric, the bus driver here. I don't know about you guys, but I know what I will be doing every Tuesday, Saturday, and Sunday. And Thursday nights, too. I'll be over at Shady Sports Network, so catch up with me. Holla at your boy.